For 20 years, we've been creating innovation in the CX industry, and now we're seeking out brilliant new perspectives on CX you just won't find anywhere else. I'm Richard Owen. Welcome to the CX Iconoclast. My guest, Angela Vargo, is VP of Marketing at Breeze Airways, which calls itself America's newest and nicest airline. With a focus on leisure travel, Breeze offers affordable nonstop flights to underserved routes. A startup airline is, of course, rare enough that it's probably worth a conversation for that reason alone. But I especially wanted to talk with Angela about Breeze because of its technology-first approach. The heavy reliance on technology provides us with an instructive example of what experience-driven disruption can look like, even in long-established industries. Angela stepped in to lead Breeze's marketing just as the country emerged from the most restrictive phases of pandemic, and as people displayed a great deal of eagerness for travel. She brought more than 2 decades of experience in aviation and other industries to the job with her. We talked about some areas that are quite specific to Breeze, like the controversial decision to use chat in place of a traditional telephone-based call center, and some of the customer experiences challenges faced acting in a heavily regulated space like airlines. But there's lots to learn from our conversation no matter what your industry. Some areas of discussion that you might want to listen for. First, the effects of technology can reverberate in quite unexpected ways. At Breeze, technology radically changed the role people play in providing customer experience. Fundamentally, Angela feels the pandemic shifted how people spend and value their time, and that means businesses are operating in quite a new environment. Also, information is clearly the coin of the realm here. It's critical to know the difference between situations people will forgive or overlook and those that create intractable dissatisfaction, so you can head those off. It's ultimately when a customer can't solve a problem that the human element of experience turns out to be critical. Enjoy the conversation. So I'd like to start by talking a little bit about what it means to create a new airline, because obviously the airline industry has been around a long time. Breeze is now, getting on 4 years old, and trying to do anything innovative and differential in the airline industry has got to be quite challenging. So how do you think about creating new and better customer experiences with a new airline?
Well, when Breeze was first born, it was about 4 years ago, but we've only been flying for 2 because COVID entered the picture kind of right in the middle and threw a wrench. So the launch was originally planned for much earlier than what it was. And as a result, I guess you could say that Breeze is really one of the only airlines in the world that is actually created and positioned to survive and thrive in a post-COVID world. Because in this industry, there have been, several major milestones that have changed the trajectory of this industry, starting from deregulation to 9/11 to now COVID. And COVID has been one of those where no one could have predicted the impact that it would have on not only the industry, but on people's lives, simply because we were all shuttered at home. Business travel came to a complete halt. Breeze was always concepted as a leisure-based airline, but that became even, more poignant for us as we, started to develop on the business plan and realized that we actually were kind of sitting on a pretty big opportunity. And once people started to really get out of the house, the one thing they wanted to go do more than anything was get on a plane, but not go on a plane across the ocean. They wanted to get on a plane and go to their backyard and explore some close-in destinations. And so we launched in May of 2021 and took off like a rocket ship, with no awareness, and people didn't even know what Breeze was. But we had 2 advantages. 1, people wanted to travel. 2, we were providing nonstop service to locations that did not have it. So we are primarily targeted towards the secondary markets that are kind of overlooked by the major carriers.
So I'm interested in you say sort of post-COVID. I mean, you've been in the industry long enough to learn the lessons pre-COVID. What do you think is different post-COVID in terms of either travelers, their desires, their expectations. I mean, have we all changed? And do you think it's an enduring change?
A lot changed, actually. And I think two of the biggest changes were one, how people spend and value their time. And we all became more tech savvy. And the combination of those two things means that maybe you don't go to every business meeting. Maybe you combine, four or five, because you know that it can be done over video chat or it can be done in person, but you save those opportunities for in person when they're truly meaningful. And two, just, the appreciation of being able to get on an aircraft and go somewhere and experience new things, I think has just shifted people more towards experiences than ever before. I think when we look to gift giving, and to what we want on our bucket list for the coming year or whatever that might look like, it all includes travel to some degree for many, many people.
Yeah, so it's at some level, it's just something that once you take it away, you start to appreciate it more, right? And so missing out,
Yep.
we want to get it back. But there's also been, there's been a lot of really good research supporting the idea that experiences convey more overall gratitude and utility to people than items do, at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
And you could argue that's just a developed society. At some point, you sort of reach peak stuff and you say, I've got enough stuff. Where do I want to put my resources? So COVID was a big reminder. And it'd be interesting to see how long that effects last, right? It could be that over time we start to revert back to traditional ideas. I do agree with you that I think on the business conferencing, I think that genie won't go back in the bottle. And the also just general digital tools, right? I think you had a generation of people that had to function entirely digitally, and they're not going back. So I think our expectations have changed permanently for the better.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think that, generationally, because of COVID, this obviously elevated that, experience means everything to a younger generation, much sooner than maybe it hit, the older generations. And I also think that even the older generations that weren't particularly tech savvy had no choice. They were ordering groceries online, they were door dashing for the first time. And because of that, it elevated their entire perception of what can be done from their phone. For us, for Breeze, we do not have a traditional call center. And that, when we first announced that out the gate, even before COVID happened, it was seen as controversial. But, in today's day, you really just don't need one. You don't need those people that are sitting there on the phone for 10 minutes trying to solve one person's problem, when that same individual could be solving 5 people's problems, much quicker and on my time versus theirs.
So that begs an interesting question. So you talk about different age demographics, and you're right. Traditionally, we used to think, well, if and I talk about a good example in the banking space. You spoke to someone under 30 about what a bank is, and they'll say, maybe it's PayPal, it's on my phone. You speak to someone over 50, and they'll say, well, it's a bank branch. And so this distinction was always well understood by generation. This sounds to me as though even if Breeze might have initially thought of itself as a company that was well geared up to that former group, the group that didn't want to interact with a contact center, wanted a digital interaction, you could make an argument now that that's everybody. Essentially, that distinction's kind of collapsed, and everybody wants this different approach.
Yeah, and I think that it's also just more commonplace, even in the likes of Uber. You don't pick up the phone and call Uber when you have a situation to deal with. Now, I will say that the airline industry is unlike any other industry, and it kind of sits alone in the passion that people have for it and the opinions that they have about air travel. And so while we could easily say, well, you don't call Uber and you don't call Amazon, people have a very different expectation on the experience when it comes to dealing with an airline. And so, we're not going to be, making 100% people happy by not having a call center, right? Because they do want that human interaction and they want that voice over the phone. But what we are doing is we are creating that pathway and we're educating them towards it, because once they've experienced it, they realize that this isn't actually a bot, it is a person. We don't actually use bots for our customer service. So the person sitting in their home in Provo, Utah, really truly is a human, and they are interacting with you, and just like you and I are now, having a conversation.
Right. And there's a big difference between having a chat-based conversation with another human and interacting with a bot. I mean, they superficially look very similar, but they're completely different. I actually had a interaction the other week with a bot that somehow had managed to master condescension. And I was blown away. I'm not sure how you can program that into a computer. I didn't think computers were that rude, but I guess humans program it, so you can still program lousy behavior into a bot. But I think it's an important distinction, this idea that at the end of the day, you're using a different medium of communication, but it's still people, and with the ability to solve complex problems and empathize, and just a different type of medium, which, as you said, people got to get used to. I think one of the things that's always distinctive about the airline industry is, in some ways, people's travel experience is a conglomeration of different experiences, right? Ranging from transportation to the airport, and then obviously there's the airport experience itself. And so it's a very hard experience to control. I mean, to some degree, the airline sort of is the front brand on what is a lot of composite experiences. Is there anything that can be done to sort of solve that problem from your perspective? Are you at the mercy of others?
To some degree, you are at the mercy of a lot of factors, including Mother Nature, including airline operations and things that are not completely in your control. That is the nature of the beast, and so that's not going to change anytime soon. The travel ribbon, though, for the guest, or we call them guests, really begins and ends with Breeze. Even in the airport experience, there's still a Breeze guest. They might be at LAX, but they're still a Breeze guest. They're not an LAX guest. So we do have to think about that end-to-end experience, and we have to try to smooth out the kinks as much as we possibly can. And when we can't, then, that's really where experience kicks into high gear, because it's in those moments where, it's, truly shows you or shows the guest how good you are at what you do. And, people don't necessarily give you a bad rap for being a few minutes delayed, but they can be pretty unforgiving in certain situations, and understanding what those are and being able to head those off, quickly and with empathy is, just a key part of it. And it's whether it's in your control or not, you have to be ready to step up and apologize and make it right.
So I think that's a great insight for the business you're in. And last time you and I talked, I remember you put a lot of emphasis on human factors in your business. There's just this notion that you could, essentially engineer a really good culture in the business. And, you've experienced obviously at Southwest, which in some ways was the first, I think you can make a case for the sort of first culturally engineered airline. In some ways, it had its culture writ very large. And it was one of the things that people really liked about the airline. You can't control weather, you can't control airport delays, but what you can do is put well-trained human beings in a position where they have the skills to be able to handle customers. And it seems to me that gets you an awful long way. I think that's the point you're making, that's the controllable element.
What we've essentially done is we created this technology first airline. So we're putting the tools in the guest's hand to be able to take care of themselves and solve their own problems. At the end of the day, we want them to be able to solve 98% of the issues that they run into. And so what that means for the human element of the business is, suddenly, instead of hiring people who are constantly having to solve problems and be on the front end of, doing all of the kind of the ugly stuff, they're there to just be the human interaction, right? To be the good person, to help out, to make sure the person's having a good experience, to ensure that, that they can smooth over the rough edges. But it's very far from the days when you would have to stand behind a counter as a guest agent, as an agent, and click, these keys for 15 minutes for one small change. Now it's, on my phone, it's in my palm of my hand. I can make those changes. And the person that's standing there for me is just there to just provide a good experience. That alone helps drive culture because your people aren't just sitting there having to be the bad guy.
So the technology makes people look better, essentially, or at least takes away some of the things that have created friction between passengers and customers and the business. Because I think that, it's a tough job, right? I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, as a passenger, we often don't feel a lot of sympathy for employees of the airline, because at the end of the day, we feel like things go wrong, it disrupts our lives, and that's a stress point, and we all get pretty wound up about it. I mean, if you fly as much as I do, at some point you become extremely fatalistic about it and just sort of go with the flow. But that's, in some ways, that's an acquired skill that we have to practice to get there. A lot of people get very stressed. And it sounds to me like you're making an argument that better technology actually can take away a lot of the friction points that traditionally exist, and actually, improve the relationship between, your team and your guests.
The one thing that guests look for from humans in the airport, people in the airport, is answers. They want answers because it's a very uncomfortable and very stressful time for a lot of people, especially when things aren't going right. And so that lack of information can create the most friction and can create, that static electricity in the air that no one wants to feel. The key to a great customer experience inside of a airline is information. It's notification. It's staying, five steps ahead of them, and giving them the intel that they need to know when they need to know it, so they can make decisions for themselves. And that may even be as far as, this flight is looking like it's going to be 4 hours delayed. Do you still want to go today? We don't charge change or cancellation fees up to 15 minutes prior to your flight. We want you to have the flexibility to go and make those decisions to control what maybe that you're just going for the weekend and it doesn't mean that much to you, and you don't mind, banking up your points and going another weekend. So, giving people the control over the decision-making process and over the problem-solving process is, the number one thing that I think we can do better than anyone else to help smooth out that experience.
Changing topics for a second. So, when you think about the competitive dimensions of your industry now, for a long period of time, post-deregulation, the industry sort of seemed to be descending into a sort of single-dimensional competitive space, which is price, right? At the end of the day, I think that it was the CEO of Ryanair that said that people would drag themselves naked over broken glass for cheaper prices. Rather colorful way of expressing it. But, Ryanair grew to be a very, very successful business on this theory that at the end of the day, it really was just about providing the cheapest possible product. How do you see competition now, sort of dimensions of competition? I mean, obviously, choice of routes is a factor, because if you're offering services that weren't previously available, you're in some ways reducing the competition in just that strategy. But at the end of the day, people always have choices, right? So perhaps you talk about how you see the competitive landscape and how Breeze plays into that.
So yeah, I mean, the old adage is that, customers looked at airline flights on three factors: price, price, and price. And, if that were the case, then you wouldn't see airlines spending billions of dollars on improving the customer experience. So obviously the data there is to tell you that, that's not the case. In terms of Breeze, we are serving these secondary markets with nonstop flights that, are 98% we don't have direct competition on, meaning we're the only nonstop game in town. That allows us to go into a market like a Charleston or a Richmond or, a Hartford, and essentially become not only just the best option, the most efficient option, but also kind of the hometown airline. This is a little bit out of, the old Southwest book of these point-to-point, very efficient flights. And although we do have low fares, what we're finding, especially going back to an earlier point, is that time is everything. And people will actually look at schedule a lot more. Um, a lot more. They'll scrutinize the schedules a lot more because their time is worth that. And so for us to be able to provide them the most efficient, and affordable option automatically puts us at the top of the list. And as you gain competition over time, we want to still make sure that we are that efficient option and that we are, threading that needle for them so that they're not going and sitting in a hub for, 4 or 5 hours in between flights. That is, one of the things about air travel that, absolutely everyone can agree on. No one enjoys having to connect and get off the plane and, sit in a crowded airport. And so if we can eliminate that for, the majority of our guests who are used to flying that way and they experience it, then they're going to be willing to pay more for that experience, even if we're not the lowest price.
Yeah, and you could argue that selection of routes is part of customer experience, right? I mean, if you go right back to the formation of Southwest Airlines, it was always said they were competing with Greyhound buses. They were giving a segment of the market a product that wasn't possible. When you look at deregulation in Europe, when I was growing up in Europe, prices for short haul in Europe were outrageous. It was a very expensive market compared to the States. And then low cost entrants, Ryanair, EasyJet, etc., came in, and today short haul in Europe is insanely cheap, right? I mean, almost to the point where you wonder whether it's even vaguely possible to make money. So, selection of offering actually is customer experience. From the perspective of your customer, the time saved, being able to create a direct flight, or the convenience versus going to have to drive to a major airport, is part of the offering. Right? And I think your route selection is part of the experience. I don't think you can take that up and separate it. It's one of the things
it absolutely is. And I think even on top of that, it's you could say that we're competing for people's, we compete against Netflix, right? I mean, so if we're inspiring people to look at that route map and take a trip because it is affordable and it is quick, then that becomes an area where it isn't always I'm looking to go from point A to point B and who flies that and how much are they charging and what's the schedule. Sometimes you get in the game of inspiring, and the route network that we're putting out is definitely doing that. And people have expendable income, especially because they weren't spending a lot of that during COVID. And we've seen that people want to put their dollars towards that. So the route network, going to the Charlestons of the world, for example, and Savannahs and places that Florida. We have a lot of Florida locations. Those inspire people to want to get off the couch and to want to go somewhere.
Yeah, it's sort of what's revenge travel, right? We sort of have post COVID. Yeah. It sounds also like you would say that the prognosis for leisure travel in some ways is better than for business travel, because I think airlines which made most of their profits from filling the seats at the front of the plane are, especially long haul international, probably more exposed to changes in people's behaviors and technology than leisure travel, which, as you say, is more is likely to be on the other end of the spectrum, more incentivized. People value those experiences. Does that dynamic give you a lot of optimism about the next few years? I mean, looking forward now, do you see this as being a golden age for leisure travel?
I see it as a golden age for, whatever travel. I mean, I think it is, people make it up as they go, and, they build their business into their leisure. And, I think that it's just taking shape in a very different way. Even remote work looks different, and where people get tired of sitting, in their office day in and day out, might, get an Airbnb for a week and work remotely, right? So it's hard to draw the line between business and leisure. One of the more interesting things that's been trending in the industry, even with this shift towards leisure traveler, is the uptick in premium leisure. So the front of the plane has become less attractive because those are expensive, and typically you are earning your way into those seats anyway. But the premium leisure product is one that has become very, very attractive to people, which for Breeze is a huge benefit, because we have premium product that both in the nicest class, which is our first class seating, our extra legroom, which is, essentially, extra legroom and a couple of different perks. And then you have your nice. So we have nice, nicest, and nice, nicer, and nicest are our fare bundles. And our seating corresponds to those. But, at the end of the day, they're all good seats. But, the premium leisure piece of it and that hybrid mentality, that leisure to me doesn't mean cattle call. It doesn't mean sitting, with my knees up into my chest anymore. Leisure for me means I want to experience, something that, is enjoyable from the minute that, I step into the aircraft to the moment that I get back home.
I think that one of the most interesting things about your airline and what you're doing is this combination of technology, innovation, being very technology first, and culture of the team and the employees and the interaction between these things. Because at the end of the day, you're, an Airbus is an Airbus, a Boeing is a Boeing. I mean, there's not much you can do about the physical hardware. You can always make choices, of course, about configuration, leg room there within the remit, but the economics of the industry are such that at some point, a lot of that gets constrained, right? There's only so much you can do to make the bird fly profitably. But these other variables, the information technology investments, the information you talked about, I think that's where there's a tremendous opportunity for differentiation, because I do agree with you strongly that customers at the end of the day are more understanding of the realities of this than we give them credit for. They are very forgiving about issues of weather. I mean, not universally, there's always somebody who will get upset, but people understand the nature of weather, and of course it's safety first, so nobody wants to be taking off into poor conditions. But I think what they're unforgiving about is poor information. That's something that in this information age, they expect of every business to be exceptional at communication and information flow. And so, if Breeze can be, at the front of that, can be an airline that has a reputation for being extremely good communicator and extremely good information flow, seems to me like that puts you in a really good position for building relationships.
I think it's just about transparency. I mean, people are, like you said, they're used to getting information the way that they want it and when they want it. And, that doesn't stop at airlines. And I think that, airlines have done a really good job over the years of having the wizard behind the curtain and, having those pieces that are out of the control of the consumer where, can't touch that. But at the end of the day, they can, because the information is there. It's just a matter of understanding what is going on in this moment. And, if you walk through an airport and you can tell, kind of which one airlines get it right and which don't, just by looking at the cues, in a weather delay. And that alone will signal to you who has, done a better job at communicating with guests.
Well, congratulations on building a very modern airline. This is, I think, a lot of people would say startups, they don't tend to think of airlines, right? It's this term startup tends to be more synonymous with tech in Silicon Valley, and there haven't been that many new airlines. And there's been a consolidation in the industry going on for the last 20 years. So I think it's really important that there is innovation, and usually that gets driven by new startups. So congratulations on your progress to date. I think your observations are applicable to just about anyone running any kind of business. I don't think it's just about the airline industry, but I think we're all rooting for businesses like yours to be successful, because we're all customers one way or another. And if you can drive innovation in the industry and better customer experience, then it's better for us all in the end. So thank you very much, Angela.
Yep.
Really appreciated your comments, and good luck with Breeze.
Yep. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the CX Iconoclast from OCX Cognition. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so you won't miss any of our thought-provoking conversations. And please get in touch if you want to learn more about what OCX Cognition's predictive CX analytics platform can do for your business by providing complete insights into every account, continuously updated and connected to operations. You'll find contact info in the show notes.